this is Eric Topol from Medscape, and I'm really delighted today to welcome Dr. Michael Osterholm, who is a friend and colleague and is one of the leading lights in the pandemic. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's great to be with you.
You know, it's really been a great privilege for me to get to know you for over the past year plus since the pandemic started, and to also get familiar with your background, having been from Iowa and having set up shop there in Minnesota. Can you tell us what brought you to University of Minnesota and ultimately to develop the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, which some of our medical community doesn't know that's what CIDRAP stands for, but can you tell us all about that?
Sure. Well, again, thank you very much for having me and for your kind introduction. I must add that you have been a source of incredible information and intelligence on this pandemic throughout the duration. And at CIDRAP, your name is golden in the sense of the information you provide and the perspective. So thank you. You've provided incredible public service. You know, I in terms of where I'm at today, I have been on a journey, for lack of a better way to describe it, but one that I actually envisioned to some degree, at least as a young boy. I was born and raised in a small Iowa farm town, and it turned out that the owners of the newspaper where my father worked were really quite remarkable individuals in kind of a Renaissance way, even though living in a small Iowa farm town. And the wife, who was one of the editors of the paper, actually subscribed to the New Yorker. I'm sure one of very few people in all of Northeast Iowa back in the 1960s that subscribed to the New Yorker. And I found that the stories of the annals of medicine, the Burton Roget pieces, just really intrigued me. I had an opportunity to read one. And after that, every time that a new New Yorker would come to her and it had an Annals of Medicine article in it, she would call up and I would run up the 6 blocks from my home to her house to pick up the Annals piece, and I couldn't wait to read it. And this went on ever since I was in, junior high. And it was something that just intrigued me. I love the medical detective kind of environment. That's what these articles were. Many of them were recounts of what the CDC had done in terms of outbreak investigations. And so if you haven't read Burton Roget's work, I would urge you to do so. I had the good fortune later in my career then, knowing that I wanted to do this, to attend a small private Iowa college, Luther College in Decorah, where I found out unexpectedly that I had a double major, both biology and political science. I didn't know that I'd taken enough courses in political science to be a major until almost before graduation. But it was then I realized that the issue of biology was as much about political science as it was about science itself, and that, in fact, policy not well informed by the science is often bad policy, and science that doesn't inform policy is often wasted and left on you might say, the cutting room floor. And so my whole career has been really oriented towards that kind of combination. As a senior in college, I decided to go to the University of Minnesota because, remember, in 1975, when I graduated from undergraduate, infectious diseases were on their way out. They were done, horse and buggy material. And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor at the University of Minnesota who still understood the importance of infectious diseases. So I went there, but probably the biggest break of my career occurred with the fact with who I roomed with that very first week of going to graduate school. Turned out to be someone who was doing an internship at the Minnesota Department of Health, and they were in the middle of a large encephalitis outbreak in northwestern Minnesota, and so they needed more help. And so I volunteered as a graduate student to come and do an internship. And I started at the State Health Department in 1975 when there were just several bachelor's level individuals working there. And when I left to come to the university, we had a team of over 70 people, a third of them doctorate level, and we'd really built the department into an academic-based health department. So I've been continuously at the University of Minnesota since 1975, was at the State Health Department for almost 25 years, and really then started CIDRAP because of the fact that I understood this need for a national, international location for the merging of science and policy. I've always assumed that they were like chocolate and peanut butter. They would deserve to go together. And that's what really CIDRAP is all about today, is just that.
It's really extraordinary. The roots of your early training in both biology and political science And then, interestingly, you've helped the administrations, multiple administrations, in guiding management of infectious diseases, both Republican and Democrat. Most recently, on the Biden COVID-19 Advisory Board. Can you just review? I know it was with Tommy Thompson and Mike Levitt. You've been on both sides of the aisle here, so you would be well qualified to tell us about the admixture of politics and science and what you've seen, particularly in recent times.
Well, I can say with absolute certainty that I've never been in a time like I have been in the last several years in terms of that, you might say, mix of science and policy. At the state health department, I served 2 Republican governors, 2 Democratic governors, 1 independent governor as a state epidemiologist, and I enjoyed incredible relationships with every one of them. They were all very supportive of our public health work, and I've counted them as not only governors of my state and somebody I worked for, but also as dear friends.
Does that include Jesse Ventura?
It did include Jesse Ventura. And in fact, I must say some of my most interesting days were with Governor Ventura.
Wow.
And the reason I say that is it turned out that I have been serving as an advisor to His Majesty King Hussein of Jordan on issues around bioterrorism before Jesse was ever elected. And for reasons that are very interesting, Jesse and His Majesty actually became friends. And King Hussein thought Jesse was a character right out of the Wild Wild West and was very fond of him. And so I would meet with King Hussein from time to time on issues around bioterrorism. Most recently, just several weeks before he died, I was with him at Ascot outside of London. And I always had a pouch to carry, one from Jesse to His Majesty and one from His Majesty back to Jesse. And so I was their gopher in between these written messages. And it was actually a wonderful experience. And so to this day, I can count that as one of my more unusual challenges, but also one of the very good. If you look at the issue of working with these governors, I've also served roles in the last 5 presidential administrations. Most recently, before the Biden-Harris Advisory Board, I was a science envoy for the State Department during the Trump years. And actually traveled around the world representing the U.S. government in planning for pandemics, ironically. My roles have always been based on I'm a member of this public health army. Our job is to provide support to whoever is in office and give them the best and most unvarnished information I could. You mentioned the issue with Secretary Tommy Thompson, a period of time that was obviously a great tragedy in this country, 9/11. I had written a book that was published on 9/11 of 2000 called Living Terrors, our war, the bioterrorist catastrophe. And it was all about preparing for bioterrorism. So when the 9/11 event occurred, I was surprised anybody knew about it because I thought that I had bought 11 of the 12 copies that had been sold that year. And then it became a New York Times bestseller after 9/11. But Tommy Thompson asked me to come and help work there. So I split my time between the University of Minnesota and at HHS as a special assistant to him. And I went in and said, I will say what I'm going to say. I'll be respectful. I surely don't want to cause any problems, but, I've got to speak the science. And, I never once during that entire time felt at any kind of way of a pressure to speak a party line versus just give good scientific advice. I had the good fortune of working closely with D.A. Henderson, Phil Russell, both giants in the business who are no longer with us. Stuart Simonson, who was, I think, one of the most important and effective government workers I've ever worked with. And so it was an experience. But I've had that with every one of the administrations I've worked with. And as you mentioned now, I remain close to a number of people in this administration and have really appreciated my opportunity to work with them.
And that's actually prescient about the book in 2000. More recently, you wrote a book in 2017, The Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs. Are you usually a year or a few years ahead of yourself of the rest of the world, or what?
I don't know. at this point, it's one of those things where, Eric, just as you are, you've been very prescient in a number of issues where if you really look at it, we really shouldn't have gotten all that much credit. I mean, it was inevitable in a way. It's like predicting blizzards in Minnesota in January. I can do that in July and usually be pretty right. I think the challenge we have today is how do we take that kind of information and actualize it into real planning? In my book, I laid out the fact, chapter 13 was on coronavirus. It says, the title of the chapter was SARS and MERS, a harbinger of things to come. In two of the chapters, I lay out what a pandemic scenario would look like with this regard to influenza. And it was really more about how would the world respond? What would happen to supply chains, governments, people, media? What would happen to our everyday lives? And, all it took was a little creative imagination to really tell these stories. It wasn't, something that was brilliant or smart. It was just basically anticipating the future. And I hope, if nothing else, this pandemic has taught us we are at our own peril if we don't consider these kinds of creative imagination situations. And I think we just had another wake-up call this past week, not on a biology issue, but on an infrastructure issue, and we saw the oil pipeline from the southern part of the United States to the Northeast disrupted from cyber terrorists. How easy it is today to break into a number of the infrastructure systems and to do just what happened. This should be a wake-up call that this is what we have to plan for and prepare for in the future. And with infectious diseases, pandemics are on the table. This one doesn't take it off the table, but it surely illustrates the challenges we have going forward if we don't start planning and preparing for things like this.
Right. No, so vital that you emphasize that. And the link between bioterrorism and cyber terrorism, really important. Now, these days I get to see you on Meet the Press, on MSNBC with, either Brian Williams or it could be Lawrence O'Donnell, with Anderson Cooper on CNN. Tell us what it's like to be representing the biomedical community on all these TV shows, and how you get put on the spot and you're supposed to guide us and provide predictions and, kind of give us the latest status report.
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is when you do any kind of public information service, what kind of media it is, know your information. And to me, the important way to do that is to have colleagues and respected friends like you. You know how many times I've contacted you or people in our kind of, you might say, little group to say, tell me, what does this mean? What do you think? Where are you at? What does this suggest might happen in the future? And so I think the first thing to do is anybody who goes into public relations related to a pandemic without having a team of really smarter people around them than they are, right there, they've got a challenge. And so that's the first thing, is be informed. Second of all, I think it's always tell the truth. If you don't know, say it. Just say it. I don't know. But say why you don't know it and what you're going to do to try to find out. And I think that far too many people who get into media situations, particularly live television, feel pressured to have an answer that, in fact, is in many cases a possible right answer, but it also may be a wrong answer. And then that leaves that permanent footprint on video that then people come back to and say, see what you said?
Yeah,
and I think that that's the challenge. The third thing is you've got to be out there pushing the envelope, but at the same time, it has to be based on good data, and you're not always going to be right. In October, when I was on Meet the Press, Chuck Dodd asked me, he said, now that Florida is completely opened up again, are we going to see more activity there? Or is it going to be like they're professing, saying that they've hit herd immunity? And I said, Chuck, they've not hit herd immunity, even after that July surge. And I said, they're going to light up again. And then October came and went, nothing. November came and went, nothing. First 2 weeks of December came and went, nothing. And of course, many people reminded me, oh boy, were you wrong. And then look what happened in January. A third of the ICUs in Florida were filled. Right. And that happened. Now, I can't explain to you why it took from October opening up completely to January to have that happen. The same thing is true with B117, the variant from originally was identified in the UK, and this increased transmissibility. There were a number of us that were very concerned based on what we saw in Europe, that this was going to sweep into the United States. And with our opening up, not closing down, and with our low level of vaccinations, remember in January, we were still debating, was it likely that the administration could deliver 100 million doses in 100 days? We ended up delivering 220 million doses in 100 days, which was incredibly important. But still at the same time, we have at least 12 states out there today that have vaccination levels that are not much higher than they were when Michigan took off. Anybody who's been in this business for any amount of time can tell you they are not aware of any respiratory pathogen where a single state lit on fire, causing the kind of damage that it did in Michigan, when all the adjoining states basically saw very little activity. Here's Indiana to the south of Michigan, and they had relatively low levels of vaccination. Minnesota was the closest in terms of what happened with that spring surge. So here, if you had predicted B117 was going to take off in this country, you were wrong. Would I say that we were in error for not having tried to get people in the mindset that this could be a challenge like in Europe? I'd do it again if the same thing happened.
Yeah,
I think we're done with it.
Right. I think this is really important that you're getting at here, because the UK variant posed an incredible threat. And as you called it, it could be the eye of the hurricane. And certainly we saw that in the UK and Ireland, Portugal, Israel, Jordan, many, many countries, not even just Europe and the Middle East.
Medicine and the Machine will be right back.
Welcome to Medscape's latest podcast series, Medicine and the Machine, featuring Medscape's editor-in-chief, Dr. Eric Topol, and master storyteller and clinician, Dr. Abraham Verghese. Remember, you can find the latest in medical news, expert perspectives, clinical tools, continuing medical education, and more at medscape.com.
So the point was, when you were saying that, the vaccinations had not taken off. And in fact, you put together a report that at CIDRAP that suggested that if we were to be really aggressive and go after the vaccinations, we should go as much as first dose as possible to get that protection started. And that went to deaf ears. Can you describe that kind of what constituted the basis for the report, and then unfortunately that it did not get any traction?
Well, in retrospect, the administration did far surpass the delivery potential, I think, for vaccine. I give them great credit. I give the manufacturers credit. I mean, again, remember, in early January, we were debating 100 million doses in the first 100 days. They delivered on 220 million doses, which was very important in taking up that slack. Our concern was in January, this was a situation we had. We had a largely unvaccinated population in this country. We weren't sure how much vaccine was coming, when, and where. We saw what B117 was doing in Europe and even in lockdowns. We saw what was happening in the United Kingdom. I mean, at one point in January, England had, in terms of hospitalizations, had it been translated to our population size here in the United States, 195,000 hospitalizations a day. We hit 130,000 hospitalizations a day in January, and we saw what it did to much of our country. So imagine if this had been 195,000 hospitalizations a day here. And so we had no choice but to prepare for that type of event. And I think that the report that we put out said, look, at the British response has been quite remarkable in that they are getting one dose out, and they're getting quite good protection, but they're getting twice as many people protected. We saw the same thing initially in Israel. And so our point was that nobody wanted to dismiss the second dose at all. No, we were all very supportive of getting a second dose. But if you had limited vaccine, getting as many people vaccinated, particularly those over age 65, with even a single dose. And I likened it to the following. Imagine you're sitting across the table from your parents, elderly parents who have underlying health problems, and you've got 2 doses of vaccine, one in each hand. And you look at them and say, I can give 1 dose to each of you, or I can give 2 doses to you, or I can give 2 doses to you. What would you like me to do? And, it was that common sense issue of just saying, do you want to have a better chance of surviving severe illness, hospitalization, or death, or do you want to see half the number of people vaccinated that could have been, and in fact, at that point, have many more people who become seriously ill and die. Well, the good news was, obviously, B117 did not take off, for which something we're going to be studying for many years to come, why that didn't happen, or why it still may happen in some states. Looking no further than what's happening in the Seychelles right now with yet a highly vaccinated population, even if it is a somewhat underperforming vaccine situation. But I think the challenge we're going to have is ultimately asking ourselves, what are we going to do in the future to scale up? How quickly can we scale vaccine? And, getting that many people vaccinated in the United States surely, as I believe, has taken the potential for a national surge like India off the table. But it has not taken off the table what I think could still be substantial activity in any given state or region. And, we'll have to try to understand one day why we didn't see more regional activity, or for that matter, even more national activity with B117 once it emerged.
Well, yes, and the virus, certainly leads to humility in terms of trying to understand it. And, I'd like to get your thoughts why Michigan lit up and went through a horrible surge, whereas similar rates of B117 arrived in Florida around the same time, and they never really had a significant bounce. Of course, that was also similar in Texas and other highly populated southern states. What are your thoughts about what could be the explanation for that kind of dichotomy?
The more I come to understand pandemics, the less I understand them. And I think that that's a point of honesty that many of us would do well to serve by. I mean, right now, I think we need a real dose of humility. I can't explain to you why in 2009, when we saw H1N1 appear, grant you that's an influenza pandemic, not a coronavirus pandemic. But as you may recall, we saw that early activity in March in Mexico, spreading around the world literally within a month. And we saw here in the United States a peak of cases occurring into mid-April. And then that number came down quite precipitously through much of the summer. We had activity, but limited activity. And then we saw it take off again in mid-August here, particularly in the southern states, 100-degree weather, it took off. And then we saw the big peak of cases that occurred right through the end of September and then dropped off again precipitously. Vaccine didn't really arrive in any meaningful way till mid-October, well as the number of cases were dropping. And, why did that influenza virus go up? What brought it down? There was no mitigation activities in place. Nobody was masking. Nobody was distancing. Nobody was recommending anything different. The second thing is, why did we see all influenza virus activity in the northern and southern hemispheres both virtually stop circulating except for H1N1? Why did we see such a precipitous drop in things like respiratory syncytial virus? It wasn't because people were mitigating themselves for the purposes of protecting them from flu. We don't know why. How can a pathogen that didn't infect everybody at once, 10, 20% at most at times, yet have such population-based impact on other pathogens? Well, we're seeing the same thing with this coronavirus. If you look at what we've seen with influenza virus circulation for each of the hemispheres, if you look at what's happened this past winter in North America, in particular with things like respiratory syncytial virus, which virtually disappeared, the challenge is what's going on there? Right. And we don't know. We don't know. And so I think this is the point that why the peaks come up and down. I mean, why did we see 70,000 cases a day in the United States of COVID-19 in July, largely from lighting up the southern Sunbelt states, and then to have it go quiet for so long and then light up those very same areas again in January? What was it that did that? Right. And I think this is where we're going to have a lot of study in our hands for years to come to better understand this.
No, I couldn't agree more with you there. And, the way that B117 affected heterogeneously European countries, that essentially all were in lockdown, but, it really hit some exceptionally hard. In others, it was relatively spared. And, these are some unexplained phenomena. Now, one thing that has come up recently in past months has been the idea of a pan-coronavirus vaccine, a beta coronavirus family vaccine that would knock them all out and basically protect us from future pandemics. No less, this idea of a variant by variant approach, which is this kind of bivalent, put into South Africa and spike protein, mRNA or whatever. Can you comment about that? Because, we have now not only just the idea, but we have CEPI funding it. We have, like today, there was a paper from the Hutch and University of Washington showing that there's these cryptic epitypes like B6. And, just the other day from Duke, there was the first evidence of a pan-coronavirus vaccine against all SARS-CoV-1, bat-CoVs, multiple variants. And it looks like things are warming up. Do we need that? And should we put the accelerator on the gas to get there?
Well, I'm going to make an editorial comment here, whether I'm permitted to or not, but I want the audience to just remember what just happened here. You want to know why I talk to Eric like I do? There was that incredible opportunity to learn so much just in his question because he stays so current. So thank you for that. Okay. I always learn in your questions even. I think two things. First of all, the issue of these vaccines and what they can do as life-saving and economy-saving measures has not really been appreciated until this pandemic. We've talked about this for decades about influenza and, largely using post-World War II technology to make flu vaccines for so many years with a very limited manufacturing capacity. And as I just pointed out, in 2009, just like in 1968, just like in 1957, when vaccine technologies were available, in every instance, the pandemics basically of influenza went largely unchallenged from vaccine because it took so long to get vaccines out there in any meaningful way. So we've actually at CIDRAP been heading up an international effort with support from the Wellcome Foundation as well as with WHO and a number of different partners, the Gates Foundation, et cetera, to actually look at and develop a comprehensive roadmap for influenza vaccines that would in fact be more of a universal or game-changing flu vaccine that would deal with both seasonal and pandemic influenza and also address the issue of the timeliness of the availability of these vaccines for a pandemic. Wouldn't it be great if you had a vaccine that protected all the time against seasonal flu, but also it kicked in when the next pandemic strain emerged? And so you didn't have to just try to play catch up and vaccinate the world. You were vaccinating them already. That very mindset, I think, and the process, and we were publishing our roadmap in the next month, that has just recently been out for review and had over 120 comments from organizations around the world. And I think it serves as a model, frankly, for the coronaviruses, that we now realize the importance of these viruses and what they might do. And God knows what the next coronavirus might be that might emerge. We no longer can count on it being a SARS or MERS-like model where when it emerges, it can sure do damage. But because one is not highly infectious till day 4 or 5 of illness, as a public health activity, we can get in quickly, identify these contacts, isolate them, and shut down transmission as we did with SARS, and we largely have done with MERS, even though with MERS we've not eliminated the animal reservoir, the camel. And so these new ones, SARS-CoV-2, is a very different model for coronaviruses and says, you know what, you're not going to have time for the next one either necessarily to scale up. Right. What are you going to do beforehand? So I think this is a very important topic area. And having talked to many economists, including Nobel Prize winning laureates in the economy, have all said, if it takes us billions and billions of dollars to make these vaccines and deliver them, they're worth every penny because they will save trillions and trillions of dollars and lots of lives. So I'm hopeful that we've now gotten beyond the point of this is just academic, pointy heads getting together saying, oh, we should have that vaccine or this vaccine. The business community, the healthcare community, all the facets of who might support these vaccines and the research and development, I think, are in place now. It's our job to capitalize on that and do whatever we can to move forward these kinds of big picture vaccines, not just take it an antigen at a time.
Right. Now, speaking of big picture, in closing, I wanted to get your perspective. That is, we had the sequence of the virus in January last year. And by November, we already had completion of multiple large scale, some of the largest trials ever done in medicine, showing validation of the vaccine's efficacy, high efficacy, safety. and then of course rolling them out in December in multiple countries around the world. Have you ever seen anything like this in your career spanning these many decades?
Yeah, well, none of us have. And I think more importantly, none of us probably actually believed it would happen. Remember, in July and August, we were all saying, boy, if we can get a vaccine that's 50% effective in the population with the coronavirus, is because of the challenges, we're going to be really lucky. And I think the mRNA vaccine technology, how it was brought forward, was nothing short of a modern, public health Manhattan Project success. Now what we need, however, is a second Manhattan Project with a Marshall Plan attached to it. And that second Manhattan Project is how are we going to manufacture enough vaccine for the world? Because as you so well know, this is no longer just about humanitarian aid. That is critical. It should be front and center. But this is about protecting the integrity of our current vaccines. As you have so very thoughtfully taught us over recent weeks, it's still unclear just what these variants are doing to vaccine protection. I don't think it's nearly as bad as some might think it is, but, what's the next variants to come down the pike? And so we need to stop transmission globally, not just for humanitarian reasons, but to protect the integrity and the functionality of these current vaccines. So that's our next project on top of the one we just finished.
Well, we sure need that. And the fact that we're all in this together and we've got, pushing 8 billion people to get on the same page to be protected so we can get this thing squashed. So in closing, Mike, I wanted just to say what you've done in your career in CIDRAP is just so formidable and impressive, and being able to work with both parties and multiple administrations, no less, with other countries. So thanks for all your effort. Thanks for representing the medical community on, multiple occasions and trying to help, provide guidance when it's tough. This is not an easy feat at all. So we continue to follow you and your daily CIDRAP podcast and all the things you can do to kind of lead the way, and really appreciate it. I know everyone in the podcast, the Medicine and the Machine, will enjoy getting to know you a bit more this way.
Thank you.
And even your interactions with Jesse Ventura, my goodness. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And, thank for your leadership, and, thank you for mentoring me. I take responsibility for the mistakes I make, but I got to tell you, sometimes when I get it right, I'm just one word away from having said what you just said.
Oh, you're kind. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.